This crush is gonna crush my heart. Baby, I should know better. Should keep it all together, but
So quite a lot of people actually ask me like how I even find these startup jobs. I thought the best thing to do is just to break it down like literally step by step, ways by ways, in which you can like find these startup jobs, or like they're not even jobs, just like startups that need people to help with, because sometimes they don't employ you on a full-time basis, sometimes they are contractor roles, sometimes they are part-time roles, sometimes you're not even like getting paid, it's just more like a like voluntary thing. But still, like I can break it down to you, tactical things that you can literally go away and do in the next 2 minutes. Because one thing I absolutely hate is that I'm on YouTube, I'm trying to look up something, someone says something that's quite interesting, and they try to break it down into a guide or try to break it down into a how-to kind of video, but it's all high-level abstract concepts. So what I want to do is break it down like literally step by step that you can follow to then like I don't know, find a startup that you want to work for maybe. Okay, let's get the easiest one out of the way, right? LinkedIn. People usually use LinkedIn to look for jobs, startup or not, and quite a lot of startups do recruit people through LinkedIn. I also tried applying through LinkedIn, but what you need to be aware of is that the startups that will be sort of recruiting on LinkedIn are probably on the slightly bigger size. And when I say slightly bigger size, I'm not saying like mega corporate size. I'm saying they might have just raised their Series A or Series B, and at that point they might be going into more like a scale up than a startup in that traditional sense. So you want to be aware of that. On the good side, it's very easy to apply, right? Especially right now with like the easy apply button, or even if you have to write a cover letter, honestly, like using ChatGPT, using Claude, using these AI tools, you can write it up in like 5 minutes. So for that, it's good. But on the flip side, there's just so much competition and it's so hard to stand out against the noise. So personally, I won't recommend LinkedIn unless you're just like super lazy. But even if you're like super lazy, your time is probably better spent elsewhere. And the second way is that if you're in the UK, especially if you're in London, you should like 100% check out Jumpstart. They are probably the best and easiest way to find a startup job or startup role in the UK. What they do is basically they match startups with people that want to get into startups. And then on the side where people want to get into startup, they interview a bunch of people, and then they only select like the top few percent of people into their program. And then once you're in, you get into this basically exclusive job board where startups will try to find talent. And because there's so little people in that community, your chance of hearing back, your chance of getting an interview is a lot higher than if you apply elsewhere. So even though I didn't land a job in Jumpstart, I was in the Jumpstart ecosystem, and I think my apply to interview rate was probably somewhere around like 70 to 80%. So for every 10 jobs I apply to, I'll get maybe like 7 to 8 interview, which is pretty crazy if you've applied for any jobs before. Now, if you're not in the UK, then Jumpstart probably doesn't apply to you, in which I'll do the third thing, which is to actually go around people you know and just like ask them if they know anyone working in any startup. Now, whenever I hear this advice, I'm like, I don't actually know anyone that works in a startup. All my friends are in corporate, no one in my family or like even my extended family works in any kind of startup. But what I realized is that once I started changing my frame of mind into like trying to look out for people that can potentially lead me to startup people, you realize there are like some kind of people here and there in your life that can make you pretty good intros. For example, how I found this current job. If you didn't watch last week's episode, check it out. But basically my friend from middle school, who I still kept in touch with all these years, he was studying in NYU in New York for a bit, and during that time he was working under this founder, which eventually became my current boss. And I think the first step and the easiest step of doing that is just start telling people around you that you're interested in startup, because you never know what kind of people they know. Yes, you may know that, oh, this guy works at JP Morgan, or this guy works in law. He's not going to know anyone in the startup world, but you never know, right? And the easiest thing you can do is just start telling people that you're interested in applying to a startup. Don't even ask them like, oh, do you know anyone that can introduce me to the world, right? Literally just tell them you're interested. And if they're a good friend, if they're a good family, then they will tell you who they can introduce you to when it comes to that. So that's the third thing you can do. Literally from today onwards, start slipping it into like conversations, start telling people, or even like post on your Instagram stories saying that you're looking to meet someone in the startup world for like a coffee or anything, and you'll be surprised who will come back to you. So that's the third thing. Now, if all three fails or the first three method doesn't really work, I recommend the fourth one, which is, in my opinion, actually the most interesting one. So first of all, like, why do you want to go into startup? Is there any particular startup that you like? Is there any like app that you use that no one knows about? What I'll do is that I'll literally go DM the founder. Now, this method probably works the best if the startup you're targeting is one that has under 10 people, or if they're still in pre-seed or seed stage where they don't have like crazy amount of employees and crazy amount of system in place yet. If you think about it, you're a startup founder, you're working with like 2 other guys, probably fully remote, or say even slightly bigger startup, you have like 8 to 9 people. Maybe you guys rent out an office in a WeWork somewhere in New York or London. There probably isn't like an HR guy screening all the emails. There probably isn't a system in place where the founder has delegated everything. So if you can find the founder's email, or you know what's easier, his LinkedIn, and just send a really, really personalized, tailored message telling them why exactly you're interested in the startup and that you want to have a chat and what you can bring on the table. A lot of the times you can actually hear back from them. And I remember watching this other guy on YouTube called Jack Cow. Jack Cow is this software engineer based in New York. Basically, he used to work at chess.com, which is like a chess playing website. It is pretty famous. And the way he got in was he literally sent the founder a cold email. Just emailed him saying that, hey, I want to work for you or something. I don't know the exacts of the email. I don't know Jack Cow, but that works, right? And people don't realize how easy it is to actually reach these people on the internet, because as long as you have their contact details, which there are ways to find people's work email online, but the easier way is probably do it through LinkedIn, because you can literally search up their name and company. Like literally go to Google, type up the person's name, the company, and then add LinkedIn at the end, search. You'll be able to find their LinkedIn most likely, and then you can just send them a DM. And it may ask you for LinkedIn Premium, which you can just do like a free trial for like 2 weeks or a month and then just cancel it afterwards. There are so many ways to reach these founders. And why this is such a good way of finding startup jobs is because no one is doing that, right? On the polar opposite is LinkedIn Easy Apply. It takes you like 10 seconds to do that. But to do what I've just said, to be able to find a startup that's not actively recruiting, at least sort of publicly, and be able to craft a message that is so personalized to the founder. Like tell him like, why do you love his app? Why do you love his software idea? Why do you like his startup? Like, is it about something he said on an interview in a podcast? Is it about a certain feature that you've been using? Is it because you yourself is a power user of that app and you think more people should know about it? That's the first thing you want to talk about. And then secondly, what you can bring to the table. It doesn't matter how much you like the company, that's all good, but in their eyes, they need to see a way for you to bring value to them. So for me, my experience both in consulting, but also more so actually as a content creator who knows how to scale a content brand, as well as a bit of experience building my own software project, really adds value to what my boss is looking for right now, which is someone to scale their media brand as well as bring a lot of partnership onto the table. So focus on that, why you love them. So focus on that, why you love their brand and their brand specifically, also what you can bring to the table. So that's probably the best way to actually find really interesting startup jobs that isn't even actively recruiting. And the last way, which is a method that I heard from my other friend who was also applying to startup, and this was actually such a genius way of applying to startups. This gives you quite a high chance of hearing back, but sort of like less room in terms of the type of startup that you're targeting. So what you would do is to specifically target and reach out to startups that have just raised money. Think about it. You're a startup, you just raised 3 million. You have 3 million in the bank. This is probably the time where it's easiest to get into that startup because they literally have 3 million in the bank. You know, like if you're a good fit, they'll hire you right away. And how can you find these startups? You can go to websites like Crunchbase, and there's a way to like sort different startups by sort of like time that they raise. And if you do that, you'll get a list of startup that has recently raised money. Or if not, you can probably just go to like Perplexity or like ChatGPT and ask it like, oh, what are some startups that have recently raised X amount of money in the X industry. Now, that being said, you need to know like what kind of industry you want to work in. That we touched upon last episode. And if you do that, right, you can get a list of companies that have just gotten funded, that have just like raised a lot of money, and they probably are looking to hire people, because that's quite a typical way for a startup to spend their raised money to hire more people. So literally find those startups, reach out to them, say what I just told you, like why you like them, what you can bring to the table. And I think that's essentially like most of the ways that I can think of finding a startup job. The best will still be warm intro, because that way you can almost guarantee that you'll get at least a chat. Hopefully those are like concrete and tactical enough, but if not, like feel free to ask me any questions down in the comment, and like just leave any questions in the comments. I'm so curious about what people is actually thinking about when watching these videos. Like what do you like, what do you don't like, what question do you have? Yeah, leave them down below and I'll try my best to answer all of them. Best part about working in a startup is that I can just wear a hoodie and baggy pants. Realistically, I don't even need to wear that because I'm literally working remotely, but we're gonna go into the office today.
Carving out lines like veins in the street. Truth buried deep where the silence meets the beat.
So I've just wrapped up work for today. I always find myself a bit more productive when I'm in the office. Not even in the office, because I'm in like a WeWork and I'm working by myself remotely. But I guess in a co-working space where other people are also working, I guess it's kind of like, you know, when you're in university, when you're in school, you're a bit more productive when you're working in the library versus working at home. But yeah, pretty productive today. Just discussing and finalizing a few partnerships between my startup and other startups. Pretty exciting. That's like kind of the first project that I've been dealt with since joining this startup. But I want to touch on something that's super interesting that I've never really experienced before. The differences between working in a startup as someone that's no longer like a junior person versus working at a consulting firm, a big, global consulting firm like I used to. I basically went from someone who's really used to and really good at getting and executing directions versus now that I'm in this role, I'm basically setting my own direction and I have to basically be the person that's actually coming up with a strategy. This sounds really ironic because I used to work in strategy consulting, and I used to think that, I work in strategy consulting, that way I get to, like design and create high-level strategy, which if you have worked in consulting, isn't the case, especially as a more junior person. Your day-to-day is just executing on whatever your manager is telling you to do, no matter, like making slide decks or working on different Excel models. But so far in my 2-3 weeks of working here, I am truly like on my own, deciding where I want to put in my effort, deciding where I want to place my bet that I think can yield the best results. And that is something that I'm super not used to. In my current role as the head of growth, everything that is partnership or marketing related is directly under me. So I have like potentially 100 different things that I can do. And I have to choose between which one to prioritize, which one to do later, which ones are like easy to do, but yield just enough result that we should do it now, which ones might take a lot of effort but can bring a lot of value in the long run. And what that means to my day-to-day is that a lot of my time is actually spent thinking, strategizing, and brainstorming rather than actually being on the ground executing meaning like literally, like typing or creating stuff. In consulting, this might mean like actually making PowerPoint slides or actually building out a Excel model. But in my current role, because I have the decision making power, which is why every decision is so much more leveraged, which means every decision is so much more important. And the difference between a bad decision and a good decision is massive. If I make a good decision that only takes me 1 hour to execute, that will pay off 10 times, 100 times more than if I made a bad decision, even if that might require me to work like 100 hours, if that makes sense. So I guess as part of my transition from corporate to working inside a startup is to understand that it is okay to like actually spend some time making sure your hypothesis behind each decision is valid, that you know exactly why you are trying something, that you know exactly why you are experimenting with something instead of just directly jumping into doing that thing, because that's the first thing that you can think of. And I guess I can also touch a bit upon what has been some of the strategies I've been using to make sure that my decision making and my strategic thinking is really, really good. So firstly is understanding the 80-20 rule, or I think it's called the Pareto principle, which is that 80% of the results that you create in a job, or 80% of the result that you generate from a project, will be generated by 20% of the input. So in terms of football, because I'm a football fan, in a football team that Messi is playing in, 80% of the goals will be scored by Messi. In a basketball team, 80% of the points of a team will be scored by LeBron, for example. This also applies to work, right? 80% of the money will come from 20% of the customer. And likewise, in my case, 80% of the result that I generate for my startup will be generated through 20% of the action and the initiatives that I start. So it is more about identifying what are those 20% actions that I can leverage and double down on to make sure that I keep generating a lot of good outcome. And the second rule that I've been using that is also quite interesting is actually one that I learned from my friend last night. So yesterday we went out for dinner and I was telling him that I am sort of like realizing and experiencing this transition from being someone that's getting the direction to someone that is setting the direction. And one framework that he told me that has actually been pretty helpful is to think of this prioritization framework in terms of value and effort. So for the 100 things I can do, what is the perceived value that each can bring, and also what is the perceived effort that will take me to get the thing off the ground. For example, in terms of marketing, something that is very high value might be to create a completely new paid product for our customer. That way we can like make a lot of money. So that might be really high value, but it might also be very high effort. It will take me, like maybe a month or two to like actually create that digital product from scratch, compared to something that might be, like lower value, but very low effort. For example, we have a huge following on social media, but we haven't taken any sponsorship deals yet. That might be something that is relatively low effort, but immediately brings in a lot of value. That kind of thinking also helps you filter through and prioritize the actions and initiatives that you should be starting. And also today I'm at the Canary Wharf WeWork in London. This is actually my second time being here. Funny enough, last time I was here, I was interviewing with another startup. So that's like another story. But yeah, just gonna wrap up with some admin tasks and then call it a day. So this week, our startup's working on a new Product Hunt launch. If you don't know, Product Hunt is this website where people sort of promote their new startup or new product. And even though our product has been sort of existing for 3 years, we have a new update that will basically almost revamp the website. And I'm just like quite nervous because I'm basically like heading and leading this Product Hunt project. And if I do well, this will bring so much money and so much more users into our platform. And I think like we really want to make sure we smash this out of the park, but I've never done it. And I realized that's a recurring theme in the startup space. Last year when I was building my own startup, like Matcha, LifeXP, CaseFast, I was like learning the job on the fly. I was the guy that's jumping out of a plane and then on the way down learning how to use a parachute. And at this job right now, it's the same, right? I've never done a Product Hunt launch. I know what it is. I've used it briefly before, but from not having done a single launch before to now having to like lead a Product Hunt launch with like its own strategy, the timeline, key things that we need to do, all within a month, is pretty crazy to me. And I think that's what's good and bad about startup. Like you get so much of these crazy stuff that's just thrown to you that you have to figure out how to do. No one's really giving you any sort of guidance, not that much at least, because like I'm basically leading most of the project I'm doing. Yes, I have a boss, the founder, but he's always so busy doing other stuff. And him being busy is exactly why he hired me in the first place, because he wants to delegate most of these growth tasks to someone that's actually capable, that can actually hustle and figure it out. And it's just kind of scary sometimes, imposter syndrome. But I guess you just have to keep telling yourself that you'll figure it out. This is such a good learning opportunity. The fact that you're feeling discomfort is a sign that you're growing. And this relates to another point on what kind of opportunities, projects, or jobs, whatever you want to call it, that you should take up on. I think I read it on another Paul Graham essay. I forgot his name. I'll link it down below or show it up screen here if I do find it. Basically, you want to find a job where there is measurement and there is leverage. So let's talk about what that means in the sense of the opposite. You don't want a job that doesn't have measurement and doesn't have leverage. A job that doesn't have measurement is one where you can't really measure your performance in a objective way. So for example, that's kind of what I had in consulting. Yes, there are like performance cycles, there are review cycles, and after each project, people will like give you feedback. But still, that's quite like qualitative. But instead, at my job right now, there are clear numbers and metrics that track how I'm performing, right? In terms of our monetization number, like how much money I've been able to make for the company, our content audience, how much people is getting engaged, how much people is our content reaching, and what's the subscriber rate for like our newsletter, for example. These are all metrics that tracks how I'm performing. And measurement needs to be tracked because it's such a good way to show whether you're doing a good job, a bad job, and then it can become a form of leverage itself. Because right now, as what I'm doing can be measured, there's a clear way for me to say, hey, look, in the last 6 months, I've been able to do X, Y, and Z, which is 2 times, 3 times better than what you expected, or just like in general, much better than other people that's doing similar stuff out there. And that opens so many doors, whether inside a company or in the future outside, or sort of like as my own venture in the future as well. And the second thing on top of measurement that you want is leverage. You don't want to be in a job where yes, your performance is being measured, but you don't have any scope for decision making that can essentially like change how you work. So my current job gives me a lot of room for leverage because I can essentially decide what project I want to start. So in a given time, there's usually 100 different things that I can do with growth that helps our company grow in terms of reach, leads, or also monetization. And it's up to me to decide which one of those makes the most sense, which one of those will bring the highest impact. So in this case, I have both measurement in terms of like measuring how I do, how I'm performing, so I can track how well I'm doing, but also leverage, right? If I see that my performance isn't doing too well, if I see that what I thought was gonna happen isn't really happening, I can leverage my decision making to do a new project instead of sticking to what we're doing right now. Instead, something that doesn't have any leverage is similar to what I worked on in consulting. I know I keep bashing consulting, but I don't actually mean that. I just want to use it to illuminate an example. I actually am quite happy that I started my career in consulting, but we can get into that next time. My job as a consultant has no leverage. It doesn't really offer me much scope for decision making. You know, like my manager tells me to work on these, and these slides. Okay, I can do that, but there's quite a standard way of doing that. And there isn't a lot of room where my thinking on how I work on that will have an outsized impact on sort of the value we deliver to our client. And that's a good example of a job that doesn't really have measurement, but also doesn't really have leverage, right? There's no really any like numbers or concrete things that you can measure that then you can maybe like put into your CV for your next job, or even like any form of leverage where your decision making and how you decide to do something different can create a 10x difference between you and your colleague who's doing like the same task. Think about professional football player, right? Let's say Mbappe. Mbappe has both measure and leverage. In terms of measure, like you can know exactly how many minutes he played, how many goals he scored, how many assists he had, even like breakdowns of like, you know, like expected goals or like how many successful dribble he's had in the last, 2 games. And if he's playing well, you know he's doing well. And when you compare Mbappe to another striker that's not as good, the number speaks for itself. So that's measurement, you want that. But also there's leverage, right? Leverage means how well you do actually matters. Yes, Mbappe is given lots of scope for his decision making, right? That's just like on the pitch, how well he plays decides whether the team wins or loses. And that's so important because that means if he is good at his job, he will get paid really handsomely because he has the scope to change a football game. And when you combine any of these opportunities that have both measurement and leverage, you realize that they have one thing in common, which is a possibility of failure. And that's actually such a key ingredient in this like formula, because even going back to the Mbappe example, he has real threat of possibility of failure, right? If he doesn't perform well, the numbers will show, and like you can also tell just by like watching them play. And if he doesn't show up long enough, if he plays bad for like a whole year, then like in return, how much he get paid or what team he play for will eventually reflect that. He will go to like a team that's not as good. He'll get paid much less than he did in his prime. But that also means if he does really well, if in the next season he scored 2 times as much, and if he plays 2 times as well, he can get paid almost like 2 times as much. Not saying that he's not already getting paid a lot, but you get the idea here. And the lesson I learned is that when I look for any opportunity, and this is not just like a job that you apply, that you go to, but also like any kind of side projects or like any kind of side hustle that you start, you want to make sure there's measurement and leverage, because that's how you can get outsized return for being so good at the job. That links back to the thing I just talked about, because the possibility of failure is not something that I'm used to. Because back in consulting, you're very well protected. There's no such thing as possibility of failure. Maybe the biggest thing that you can fail at is just, like the slides was a bit off. The logos aren't really aligned, and the Excel model has a little bit of problem. But still, there's so many layers of people above you checking for work, and there really isn't that much of a chance for you to have like a major fuck up. But I know having the possibility of failure means that I'm on the right track. So for that, I'm happy. It just means that I need to take some time to adjust to it and make sure that I smash the job out of the park. Friday night, 9 p.m. Just came back from the gym, drinking my protein shake. And goal for this year is to hit 100k subscribers, make 100k, and get really, really good at my startup job. I just finished my second week at my new startup, and honestly, it's been great. I'm basically getting paid to learn and to try build stuff. So basically how it works, right? I won't get into too much detail. Is that we have a main business, which is the actual startup. And then we have almost like a spin-off media arm of the business. And the founder always wanted to grow that media side of the business, but he never had time to really do that. So he decided to hire someone, and that person is me. So I'm basically like building a company within a company. Obviously, I'm not doing it right now because I'm only 2 weeks in, but the vision is that in 6 months to a year time, I'll be managing my own P&L sheet. I'll be deciding if I want to hire more people. I'll be deciding where to invest the money that we make. I also get a pretty aggressive profit share depending on how I perform on the job, which is like really exciting. Think about it, right? Last year, I was trying to do indie hacking. I built a bunch of apps, but that was just like me trying to do everything from scratch, like from literally nothing. But now here it is, someone's paying me to actually do it. And it makes sense for them, right? It's not like I'm taking advantage of them, because I'm actually going in, I'm using my expertise, I'm pouring in hours to try make them loads of money. And this is really the best scenario, where it's a win-win scenario. For him, he gets someone that's hungry, that kind of know what they're doing, that can make him loads of money. For me, I get to learn directly under him. He's a founder with 4 exits, so one of his startups to like Walmart, which is crazy. I get paid whilst doing it because technically I still work for the startup. But really, I'm like building a company within a company, and this is like so exciting for me. And when it was the start of the year, I was thinking about how I can set super aggressive, crazy goals that can like push me to my limits, right? And I think I wrote them down here. I can show you. As you can see, it's called Morning Bible because I read it every single morning. So if you can see it here, it says by 2026, 100k followers, 10k a month through content. I want to change it a little bit because now that I have a startup job, I want to like incorporate that into my goal as well. But ideally, everything I make, except for my salary, should round up to around 100k in a year, which will be really, really cool. And then also the last goal is to make my company, not my company because that sounds weird, but make my business unit, so like the media arm, a 25k a month business. That will be another goal of mine. So these 3 are like my 2026 goals. They're quite far off if you know where I'm starting at. So right now on Instagram, I'm closing in on 9k. On YouTube, I think I'm around 3.5, 4k. So I want 100k by the end of the year. There's a saying, if you aim for the moon, even if you don't land on the moon, you'll find yourself among the stars. And that's really like my philosophy in terms of goal setting. That's how I've always done stuff. Ever since I was like a teenager, trying to get good grades, trying to get into good university. And it's always worked well for me, right? I might never really land on the moon, but even then I still land among the stars, which is usually better than what I would have expected in the beginning. So yeah, 100k followers, 100k cash, and then make my business unit a 25K a month business. Yeah, pretty exciting. So it's Saturday. Usually how I'm normally working right now is that Monday to Friday around 9 to 6 I'll be working on my day job at the startup. But then I'm also doing content on the side. I'm posting daily on Instagram and then trying to post weekly on YouTube. How I'm doing that is basically using the time outside of work on my weekdays as well as my Saturdays. So every morning I wake up at around, I want to say 7:30 or so. I'll start work at 9. I'm usually remote, which gives me an hour or so every morning to work on content. And then after work, I get off at maybe around 6 or so. Honestly, it really depends because the team is super asynchronous. So sometimes I do like work here and there in the late evenings. But I think on average, I can get an hour or two every day after work, just working on content or anything side project related. So that already gives me like 2 or 3 hours or so that I can work on every single day. And then that's like Monday to Friday. Sometimes obviously I'm out for like dinner with friends, which means I get less time on the weekdays. But on Saturday, I'm basically spending like half the day at least working. So right now, I've just woken up. I've already started working. I'll be meeting some friends for coworking after lunch. I'll be doing like a coffee chat with some friend in the startup industry before dinner, and then maybe hit the gym together. We'll see. And then dinner time, and then maybe do a little bit more work. So that's how I'm sort of like managing what I'm working on right now. Honestly, I quite like it because nothing really feels like working. Even my day job right now, yes, it is like a job. I'm getting paid to do it, but at the same time, like I'm basically building a startup within a startup. So it feels like I'm just doing interesting work 24/7, which is something I've really, really wanted to do since like maybe 2 years ago when I first started working in consulting. And another goal of mine is to hit financial time and location freedom in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully closer to 5. And I've kind of starting to hit that location freedom bit because think about it, right? Yes, my job needs me to stay in London, but then look at the team composition where people like literally around the globe. And I'm sure like if I do a good enough job, if I know what I'm doing, like in a year's time, I can be like working wherever as well. So that's just kind of crazy and amazing to me that like, oh, actually it's not that hard to achieve part of that goal. And then once we do that, what's left is time freedom and financial freedom. So it'll be super exciting. Let's see how we do. So I just had lunch. I'm heading to a cafe to co-work with some of my creative friends. Gonna be a pretty good Saturday, even though it's not too sunny. Like London's getting a bit gloomy again today, but we'll be there. We'll be there when London is sunny again. So one of the coolest things I've learned in the last year of like working in a startup space is that so many people doesn't work like a typical job. And what I mean is that like a few years ago when I was in uni, feels like the path was either working a 9 to 5 in a corporate or just like going all out and then putting my own business. But then in the last year, I've talked to so many different people. I've seen so many people working in a space where they have like such unique ways of organizing their life and designing their life around like interesting work. So for example, in my current startup, there's a few people who isn't like full-time, but they are basically working multiple startups at the same time. And a few months ago when I was like interviewing for another place, I was chatting to the people over there, and I remember our CFO turns out to be like a fractional CFO. And what that means is that he doesn't work full-time at our startup, but instead he works at like 3 different startups at the same time. And I also know people who like works full-time at Google, and then like before work or after work he works at a startup. It's so interesting to me how sort of like work isn't as it was before, where it definitely has to be like a 9 to 5 where you're like full-time committed to one thing. And on a similar topic, I was speaking to another guy who's like a seasoned entrepreneur in the space, and he was saying how he's seen quite a few people who's like doing this productised service model rather than like charging by hour, which is like the more typical way of how like a full-time employment works. So the way you'll think about it is that in like a proper job, right, you're measured by how many hours you work in a week. Classic example will be working a 9 to 5, which is like 40 hours a week. And even in a startup, that's still quite common. But he was seeing more and more people who basically not only work multiple jobs, track their work not in terms of the hour they work, but the actual output that they produce. So an example is that rather than saying I'll do 40 hours of work for a startup,
you'll say something like, I'll produce X result for a startup. And that basically frees you up from the time commitment, right? Because if you think about it, if you can produce that kind of work, why does it matter how many hours you're working for that particular startup? And I'm just thinking that model has so much potential. If you're really, really good at something, especially with how you can like leverage AI nowadays, you can basically produce 10 times more result than someone that might be working the same hours as you, or maybe even more hours than you. So that's another like super interesting observation.
ちょっとも待ってどこ行くの実はここにない暗闇の中探す真夜中に踊る気がつけば走ってる